Hello once again and welcome back. I'm Patrick Jagir, the Cosmic Alchemist. So this video I want to talk about the Vedic New Moon in Pisces. So in the Vedic astrology tradition, the calendar is basically a lunar cycle. So the Vedic New Moon in Pisces marks the new year. So Happy New Year, in a sense. And so Pisces is the 12th sign of the zodiac. It's the final sign. It has to deal with completion. So the new moon in Pisces every year marks the new lunar year by Vedic reckoning. And usually this falls right around the spring equinox, which really in a lot of traditions is the beginning of the solar year. So this year, Vedic new moon in Pisces falls on March the 24th, which is only about 3 days after the spring equinox. So they sync up pretty close. Some years the new moon in Pisces will actually go out to about the first week of April, and by the end of the first week of April it happens. So again, this year it's Tuesday, March 24th. And so this new moon in Pisces really sets the tone for not just the month as the new moon usually does, but it sets the tone for the whole year, and what kind of things we're going to be dealing with in a broad sense. Of course there's so many issues we're going to deal with as individuals and as collectives, as communities and countries, and as a human family. So I want to talk about this a little bit, some interesting things going on. So definitely for the month there's a theme here of isolation, escapism to a degree. Escapism can be negative and it can be positive. It can be healthy and unhealthy, because sometimes you have to escape a little bit and you can't be so embroiled in all the problems that are besetting you. Sometimes you need to kind of tune out a little bit and divert yourself and distract yourself, and sometimes we just distract ourselves too much. So it's all about the context. Nothing is there is no black and white. It's contextual. So what you have here, upper left, is where the sign of Pisces falls. So on this new moon on the 24th of March, and the maximum for it is it's about 5:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, so East Coast in the United States. Pisces, and again it's Pisces new moon, so Pisces falls in the second house. So the second house deals with, it's our face, in terms of body parts. Second house is your face. So the face that you put on for the world, that you present to the world, also deals with family, deals with family money, it deals with wealth to a degree. Different houses deal with wealth. Second house is one of them. So the new moon is the darkening of the moon, and the moon is our mind. It's our physical body too. And the moon also deals with money, because money it's an abstract concept, really. In the old days, especially in Europe, people used to trade things, they used to pay for things in cattle. That's where the word fee comes from, because fee comes from the rune Fehu, which is the cattle rune. Those two diagonal lines on the Fehu rune are cattle's horns, because cows were used for, you could use their hides for clothes, you can make shelters out of it. You can use the bones, the tendons, the horns to make tools, and then you could eat the meat, drink the milk, so on and so forth. So cows were recognized by ancient European people, and not just them, but even the Maasais in Africa to this day, and even in East Africa, the big way to make money, places like Somalia, even Ethiopia, is livestock. So, and interesting thing too is that the really the whole market, the commodities market, is based on the price of cattle feed, which is connected to the price of oil, the price of gasoline, and so on and so forth. Interesting sidebar. So, money is an abstract concept, whereas commodities are real, they're tangible assets. But yeah, so Fi comes from the Fehu rune. So anyway, the moon deals with money because money is a mental abstract concept, and in the Old English, the moon, one of the words for it was mona. So mona, money. And even with the runes, the Manaj rune, which is divine mind, actually pertains more towards, money, fiat currency, dollar bills, coins, and even gold, really, because gold we have to agree that it's worth something, whereas Fehu is more tangible resources and assets. So anyway, you get the new moon in the second house. Pisces is, it's escape, it's liberation. It's also losses. So we're definitely seeing loss in money here in this season of this coronavirus, because so many businesses are closed. People can't go to work. People can't operate their businesses. I haven't been to work, to my day job as an acupuncturist, since the 12th. So it's been a little while. Going on 2 weeks. And we'll see when I get back. Definitely by the end of April, this thing will blow over. But anyway, so this new moon, points to this kind of loss of money, loss of wealth. And also, our physical bodies are in isolated places. We're staying home because of this national emergency, which was a prudent move, because nobody excuse me, nobody understands what this coronavirus really is and how you defeat it, how you prevent it. So it's a good thing. So, we're in this place of isolation. We're kind of escaping from it in a healthy way, in my opinion. And so interesting meanings that this conveys. Now, another thing that's going on is the third house, where you have Aries. Venus is in there. So, third house, right next to the second house in the top left there. Venus is not comfortable in Aries. Venus represents social activity, friendship, diplomacy, relationships. So, relationships with other people are on the rocks at this time, because Aries is all about action. It can be violent, volatile. It's a sign of the warrior. The external, the yang warrior, whereas Scorpio is more the yin warrior. So not a great time for social activities and big gatherings, and we're kind of separated from people, but it's something that has to be done. Venus isn't going to be there very long. On the new moon, Venus is at 26 degrees. Then on the 28th, Venus goes home to Taurus, which is really awesome and really positive for this whole situation. A lot of healing is going to take place, and Venus is going to be there at home for almost 5 months. So we'll be able to heal and patch things over with people. At the same time too, with Venus and Aries, people are very polarized and at odds about various issues. Donald Trump is such a polarizing figure, and there's so many different issues, but this coronavirus is kind of bringing us together, and that'll really be apparent by the end of the week. So we have some things to look forward to. Now, the thing I really wanted to get into with this video that really motivated me to do this was everything that's going on in the 12th house. So in this chart, the 12th house is up in the top right hand corner there. So the 12th house is, Pisces is the original 12th house. When you put the first house, when you put Aries there, Pisces lands on the 12th. But, in this case, on the new moon, Aquarius is in the first house, so that lands Capricorn up in the 12th house. So 12th house, again, it's isolated places, it's things that go on behind the scenes, it's hidden places, things that come out of nowhere that we didn't expect, we didn't even realize. And then the sign of Capricorn deals with government, deals with hierarchy, with the establishment, and it's the home sign of Saturn. And Saturn, you can look at Saturn not only as the judge of the cosmos, but sort of the government minister, kind of the bureaucrat, that does things by the numbers, and does things slowly, and really takes time to think about things. And Saturn is, for that reason, is limitation. And Saturn is the slowest moving visible planet. It takes over 30 years to make a single orbit. So a year for Saturn is about 36 of our years, roughly, give or take. So Saturn is at home in Capricorn, and so what this means is that Saturn really brings strength to government. It's allowed government to contain this virus, take steps to do that, lock the borders down. Saturn is limitations, borders, boundaries. Now also here in this 12th house, we have Mars conjunct with Saturn, and Pluto is here too. So Mars is exalted in Capricorn. So Capricorn is not Mars' home sign, but it's basically where Mars is a celebrity. So Mars has a lot of power here. And one thing Capricorn stands for, on top of the establishment, government, responsibility, it stands for just getting things done, being responsible, and really taking action and getting things done and being productive. And so Mars has a lot of strength here to accomplish things. And Mars deals with building and rebuilding, and a lot of building and rebuilding and cleaning up has to take place to deal with this situation that the coronavirus has presented us with. So, but then when you put Mars and Saturn together, especially in a place that's so strong, traditionally they say in Vedic astrology that Mars-Saturn conjunction brings conflicts, brings battles, volatility, because traditionally Saturn is looked at like oil and Mars is fire. So when you put oil and fire together, you get an explosion, you get a flare. So, one thing this can symbolize is it can symbolize, delays, setbacks. But at this point, delays and setbacks are a healthy thing, because, again, we have to, till this virus passes, till we get a handle on it, till we actually understand it, because there are millions of experts who claim to know exactly what's going on, really don't know what is going on with this. So until we have a handle on it, we need to step back, relax, stay home, and this is a chance to do a lot of inner work. So delays and setbacks at this time are a healthy thing. But what I'm really interested in is how this Mars and Saturn conjunction really symbolizes a battle taking place. And especially, you have Pluto here, not only conjunct with these, but at 0 degrees. So 0 is the miracle degree, and Pluto is so far away from the Sun, it takes about 270 years to make an orbit. So, a very loaded placement here for Pluto, being at 0 degrees of Capricorn. So, 0 is the miracle degree, and it sort of confers, almost a limitless potential to the planet at 0 degrees. So Pluto is the god of the underworld, and it's all about, he makes us deal with things that we were in denial about, things we were procrastinating, dealing with, and things that were hidden from us, lies, information that was hidden to us because people were lying from us. When you put that in Capricorn, it's about lies that government was, or people in government were telling and perpetrating. So that's pretty interesting. So using that as a segue, what I get from this, when I synthesize all this, Mars, Saturn, Pluto conjunct in Capricorn in the 12th house, I get a meaning from it of secret battles being fought in behind the scenes, in hidden places by what you might call a secret government. Now, another way to talk about a secret government is a deep state. So for most people, I've talked about secret government, deep state. I'm well into conspiracy land. And a lot of people have a hard time with this. But some very well-known, well-placed people have been talking about deep states for many years. And when you go back to the Iran-Contra hearings, in his closing remarks, Senator Inouye from Hawaii, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he made a comment that, from these Iran-Contra proceedings, we've learned that there's a secret government with a private navy and a private air force, and it's accountable, not necessarily to no one, but it's not publicly accountable. It's not accountable to government, Congress, any of that. And really, it's accountable to the people who fund it, and the people who make money off of it, and the people who use it for their goals. So, and nobody paid attention to any of this. This was Iran-Contra, I think it was in 1987. I was a little kid. And that ran in the newspaper. But, people kind of went back to living the 80s life. In the 80s were kind of drug and alcohol fueled, and, they were materialistic, and, it was a decade of bling bling and, a lot of material excess. So nobody ever followed up on this when these Senate hearings, these congressional hearings showed that there was all these secret activities, these illegal activities being run by what amounts to a secret government. So that's pretty mainstream coming out of a Senate hearing like that. Now, to give people a pop culture reference, to really put their heads around, Ian Fleming wrote the 007 series. It was a series of novels at first, and then it was a series of movies, and they're still making them. They're still making, 007 James Bond movies. Now, people see that and they say, well, that's fantasy, that's fiction, that's just a novel, the guy's making money writing fiction. Well, Ian Fleming was in British intelligence. He was a naval intelligence officer. He was part of MI6. He got his start early in World War II, and officially in his biography, he was involved for the duration of the war and a little while after. But when you look at the circles he ran in and some of the things he did, really into the 1960s, it appears that he was involved in British intelligence for probably about 20 years, 20 or more years. So when you do the research, there's more to Ian Fleming. And kind of an interesting sidebar, he started writing those novels when British intelligence was having a big scandal, back in the 1950s, and even I think up to the year 2000, it was actually a crime. It was criminally punishable to be gay in Britain, to have same-sex relationship or same-sex sexual intercourse. So in the 1950s, British intelligence had a big homosexuality scandal, and there was a public outcry. So based on the research I've done, I think Ian Fleming was co-opted to write those stories to sort of return some prestige and some mystique to British intelligence. So, anyway, Ian Fleming was exposed to a lot of behind-the-scenes things that go on in the world. And he knew a lot of high-profile people, and he did a lot of crazy things. And so, in the 007 stories, he wrote about this entity, which was basically a secret government or a deep state, called Spectre. And Spectre is an acronym. Spectre means Special Executive for Crime, Terrorism, Revenge, and Extortion. So Spectre is basically a billionaire and trillionaires club, and billionaires and trillionaires who control large corporations, large banks, and through the series of stories, 007, James Bond figures out that this group, Spectre, exists, and he figures out that they're actually trying to spark a world war between the Soviets and the West, the quote-unquote free world. And so he shifts his understanding that the Soviets are the problem, and he shifts his attention to undermining Spectre. And so really we have this in the modern world. We've had this for a long time, and World War I's a great example where it was very out in the open, where banks were lending money to both sides of the war, companies were selling weapons to both sides of the war, and many millionaires and billionaires were made during World War I doing this. And it had been going on in the world before that, but that's when it really exploded. And now, war is the most profitable business on earth. So Ian Fleming wrote about this shadowy group of people and corporations and banks that would make money off of starting wars, especially turning the Cold War into a hot war. And then they would come in and basically buy up the world for pennies on the dollar once it was destroyed, so they could rule it. So Ian Fleming was trying to communicate something here. He wasn't writing these stories just to entertain people, and that's a comment that Steven Spielberg has made. When people have asked him, how'd you make up all these entertaining stories, and Steven Spielberg has even said, I've never made a movie to entertain. I make movies to comment on issues that I think are important. And what does Steven Spielberg make movies about? About cloning extinct dinosaurs, about crazy forces of nature, like Jaws, alien encounters, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, E.T. He's made movies, Raiders of the Lost Ark, about the Nazis going and looking for holy relics. And the issues that he's been commenting on, he's been doing this by making really imaginative films with very off-the-wall plots that, people don't think they're real issues, but he seems to think so, and he knows all the big names in Hollywood at this point. He knows big names in politics and finance, and so Steven Spielberg is very in the know, just like Ian Fleming was. So Ian Fleming was warning us about this deep state, and he was warning us, the Soviets, the Chinese, they're not the problem. And then from the other side, telling the communist world the West is not the problem. It's these opportunists that want you all to fight each other. And so that's really what politics are, is, this two-party politics. These politicians are sponsored and run like racehorses or like race car drivers by the deep state. And the deep state is just a bunch of conglomerates, a bunch of corporate conglomerates and huge investment banks and extremely wealthy individuals, and they own these politicians. They give them the money they need to run campaigns so they can get elected and re-elected, and they lend the government money so it can operate. The government gets all its money from the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve is not federal, it's not governmental, it's basically a cartel or a consortium of big private banks like Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan, Bank of America, so on and so forth. So, on YouTube you see people, talking about the deep state and that they're drinking baby blood and sacrificing people, and I'm sure somebody somewhere does that because there's a lot of weirdos in the world, but really what the deep state is, it's just a bunch of corporations and banks that basically puppeteer all our politicians. It doesn't matter who they are, left wing, right wing. They know how to make money off of anything. Even left-wing governments, they can arguably make more money because there's all this mandatory health insurance and all kinds of these mandatory things that the people or the government has to buy. So they can make money off of anything. It doesn't matter who they are. Bernie Sanders is not impervious to these people. So, if you look up Ian Fleming, you read these books, and the 007 novels are nothing like the movies. You mentioned James Bond to a lot of people, and they get emotionally triggered, and they talk about how James Bond's a misogynist and this and that. Well, James Bond in the books was not like that. He was a pretty sensitive, in tune kind of a guy. But that's how they sold these movies back in the 60s. That's what they thought. That's what guys wanted to watch. So, and there's even some neat connections. James Bond with the Knights Templar, which were the founders of modern banking, and a lot of mainstream organizations still use their symbols. Switzerland, their flag is basically a Templar flag, just with the colors in reverse. Things like the American Lung Association use the double cross Lorraine, and so many groups use this heathen's cross that the Templars and the Knights of Malta used. So, interesting thing with James Bond is that character was Scottish. He had a French mother, and the mother's maiden name was Delacroix, or Delacroix, which means of the cross. So it's a reference to the Templars, the heathen's cross, the pagan cross of the solstices and equinoxes that the Templars used. And even, even in, I think it was Skyfall with Daniel Craig, they even go into the family chapel or the family crypt, and you see some skull and bone, carvings in the chapel, which was a Templar symbol. And the other thing too is that Freemasonry, in its modern form, got its start in Scotland after the Templars were run out of France primarily, and a lot of other countries in Europe. And in Scotland, the Templars were basically being harbored there by the king at the time, Robert the Bruce, and even the King of England was friendly to them. So in Scotland, the Templars started a safe house system, and that's what became modern Freemasonry. So, really interesting character, James Bond. So, a lot of layers to it. So, the whole James Bond thing is just illustrating that this guy who spent this career in British naval intelligence he was trying to tell us about the deep state, and even members of Congress have tried to tell us, but people haven't paid attention. And I agree with that whole outlook on things. I went to boarding school for years with some children of really elite people some of whom have gone on to be elite people, and I went to the Naval Academy. I was a naval intelligence officer for a few years, and I've seen a lot of wild things and known some really interesting people who don't see the world the way that most of us do. So, getting back to this 12th house with Capricorn, with the conjunction of Mars, Saturn, and Pluto, secret battles within government in secret places behind the scenes. So, at any given time, government is not monolithic and centralized as we think it is. It's a bunch of puppets, these politicians who need funding all the time, need money all the time. It's basically a bunch of factions fighting each other and trying to dominate. So this has been going on forever, and I think on the 24th or sometime shortly thereafter, this is going to become more apparent. And this secret war, which is, always going on at a low rumble, is going to start to escalate, and we're going to see more of it. It's going to raise its head. We might see some weird, something that looks like a terrorist attack. We may see some people fighting in a public place, like maybe gunfighting, who knows. We might have a communications shutdown for some brief period of time, in the coming weeks. And just be ready for something unexpected to happen. You may see a lot of high-profile people suddenly get arrested. And really, one of the really important things here is, I think, coronavirus has been, it's been told to us that, it's a naturally occurring virus that, evolved from nature, and, that's the end of that. Well, some experts, scientists, epidemiologists are saying the exact opposite when they look at the genome for it. So one thing I think you're going to see after this new moon is that somebody is going to start telling a narrative, a story, which is a whodunit story about where this coronavirus came from and how it got out into the world. And you're seeing the beginnings of this. Even Newsweek magazine and some other mainstream sources ran a story about how the Chinese government is calling for an investigation of where coronavirus came from. The Chinese government right now is saying that it came to China from North America back in October 2019, and they're saying that it came with American soldiers when they participated in the World Military Games. So the World Military Games is basically it's like a military Olympics. I had an uncle who participated in the GI Olympics, during World War II. So it comes from those days, and it was made international. So the last time they had these World Military Games was right in Wuhan, China, in October 2019. So the Chinese are saying this, the Iranian government is, saying they agree with their assessment, and they also want this investigation to take place. And at this point, Newsweek and these other mainstream media outlets are kind of ridiculing the whole thing and, calling it a conspiracy theory. But I think you're going to see this story gaining more traction, and people are going to take this more seriously. And, it's interesting. Donald Trump keeps calling this coronavirus the invisible enemy. And at face value, you can say, well, viruses are microscopic, so they're virtually invisible, and you can't see them with the naked eye. So he's saying the coronavirus is an invisible enemy. Well, yeah, that's at face value, and we're raised and we're educated. Even if you get a PhD, you're educated to take everything in this world at face value. Your church, your schools, your universities, your parents, they all teach you to take things at face value and just do what you're told. Don't ask any questions. But when you bring in this whole understanding of, again, Iran-Contra hearings, Ian Fleming with the 007 stories, when you bring in that way of looking at the world, this invisible enemy that Donald Trump is talking about could be this specter, this deep state. And it's interesting in the Daniel Craig 007 movie, Spectre, the symbol is this octopus or this hydra. It has all these tentacles, and it can reach into so many things and manipulate, so many different facets of the world, really. So many, in the last couple of years, so many conspiracy theories have become real. UFOs used to be a big conspiracy theory, and everybody with a college degree used to get a big chuckle out of that. And now Navy and Air Force pilots have been talking about how they've seen UFOs, and especially the Navy is actually encouraging pilots to report UFO sightings. This is running all the mainstream news outlets, and it's just issue after, there's so many things that used to be conspiracy theories are just now, they're just accepted, and people acknowledge it, but they don't really want to talk about it because, we have this like authority-based society where you're either an authority or you're kind of like in good and kind of sucking up to someone or some institution of authority. So, especially college-educated people don't like to admit they don't know something. So, yeah, a lot of these conspiracy theories are becoming mainstream, just matter-of-fact knowledge, but, people are very begrudgingly admitting it and, moving on to the next subject because not knowing something, really makes them uncomfortable. And, I see this with my parents' generation huge, where it's like, if you went to, especially if you went to college in the years of the Cold War, it's like people get very insecure if they don't know about something, and it's this big deal, and they don't deal well with being presented with new information. So, but younger generations are really open to new information, and the world's going to get a lot cooler as especially millennials, as they get older. It's going to be a different world. So, but I think this is where this whole deep state becomes common knowledge. And one thing to bear in mind when this sort of rears its head and becomes common knowledge that the deep state exists, and when this whole good guy, bad guy story about where the coronavirus came from and who's responsible for it, when this rears its head, the good guys, and I hate this term good guys because it's kind of like a boneheaded military thing that we used to say all the time. There are no good guys and bad guys in this world. It's just about what side you're on, and everybody thinks their side is good. When we invaded Iraq illegally for WMDs that didn't exist, we still called the Iraqis the bad guys. The bad guys was us tearing that country apart. But anyway, whoever is presented as the good guys may actually be the bad guys, and whoever looks like the bad guys may be the good guys. And that's especially true if you start to see high-profile people getting arrested very suddenly. Someone may cry witch hunt, and they may tell a story about how these people who are getting arrested are perfect little angels who are completely innocent. So, bear this all in mind. And, one last thing too is I want to look at the 11th house in this chart, just below the 12th house in the upper right corner. On the new moon you have Jupiter at 29 degrees of Sagittarius, so it's in its home sign. Sagittarius is all about belief systems, philosophies, worldview, ideology. And K2's right in there with it. So Jupiter, especially in its home of Sagittarius, can teach very profound lessons and deep lessons, but it can also be very extremist and very self-righteous. So, and then K2 on a bad day can be very self-righteous, can kind of be a terrorist. So this self-righteousness of belief could lend itself to this escalation, of this whole deep state war. Another comment about the deep state, people frame this whole deep state thing that, Donald Trump is basically single-handedly taking on the deep state. Well, there's a deep state that runs him too. It's just, I would argue it's a much less despicable deep state. They're globalists too, but, they don't, that deep state wants to set up more of a global republic, which is tied together by business interests, whereas, the deep state that has prevailed for the last, 1700 years with the advent of the Roman Catholic Church and its effort to, reconquer Europe in the Dark Ages and the Middle Ages, that deep state is, cares nothing for individual freedom and expression, and it really wants to micromanage people and put people under its thumbs, but so you have competing deep states here. So and anyway, you know, with Jupiter and Ketu both in Sagittarius, you know, if we see this whole deep state war escalate, it's just, what this is saying is that this, whatever event we see, is sort of driven by, you know, extremism and you know, kind of fundamentalism, because, you know, all of these things that these deep states do, it's all fundamentalist thinking, it's all extremist thinking, because they think if they're not in charge, then the whole world will go to hell, you know, and fall apart. So, and you know, the last facet to this whole thing is the first house, the ascendant house, and it's Aquarius, you know, which is we the people, the masses of people, and you have Neptune and Mercury there. So, you know, Mercury is the intellect, and Neptune is hidden agendas, hidden information. And so what this might do is it might finally tune our intellects into the fact that the world doesn't run like we're told in, you know, political science class and civics class and, you know, social studies class. It's actually, it's run by something completely different behind the scenes. There's also a possibility too that, you know, Neptune can sort of fool us and keep us, you know, sleeping, like we were lulled to sleep after 9/11, and you know, all of a sudden to board a plane you have to have your genitals groped by the TSA. So we could go either way with this. We could have, you know, we could just repeat the aftermath of 9/11 and just get herded like sheep, or we can wake up to this and you know, demand some answers. So we'll see what happens. But at this time too, Rahu is in the 5th house, and you know, really, you know, Rahu in the 5th house, it wants to, basically it wants to express itself. It's, you know, Rahu is our greatest desire, and you know, Rahu is in Gemini, so it's communication, media. So, you know, the media here can just peddle more illusions, like it has been, because Rahu is illusion, or, you know, it can sort of help break the illusions down and, you know, express something that's true, you know, and that's real. Because Rahu is kind of a keeper of secrets. So we just have to see where this goes. So thanks for tuning in. If you want to see how you will fare through all of these current events, I can do a Vedic astrology reading for you. I can basically overlay your chart or the chart of the current events and see what's in store for you, see what the year, even the decade has in store for you. I also do rune readings, which are a great way to see where your mind is at, where things are blocked, you know, see what keeps you from accomplishing the things you want to, and see where your strengths are and how to play to those. And I have some Qigong videos for sale for download. Qigong is a great mind-body practice, and boosts your immune system, and that's something we could all use right now. So, thanks very much, and I'll have more coming your way. Have a good one.